Welcome to How to Build a Nonprofit, the only podcast dedicated to deep dive interviews with nonprofit founders about their journey, their why, board development, fundraising, staffing, leadership, and making a big impact. We ask courageous and visionary founders about their struggles and successes and everything in between. As a listener, all you have to do is learn and appreciate. In this episode, we will delve into part 2 of Ask a Development Director with Jackson Cooper. Jackson has a storied career in fundraising, the arts, and nonprofit leadership. He's probably played a part in every role you can imagine in the fundraising process, from drafting acknowledgement letters to writing grant proposals to planning capital campaigns to making big asks of major donors. He also teaches fundraising and nonprofit leadership at multiple universities and has 2 book projects underway, one on fundraising and the other on board development and engagement. I've reached out to some of our listeners that I know are leading or helping start nonprofits to invite them to submit questions they have for an experienced development director. And we received some amazing questions, so many that we couldn't do it all in one episode. So thank you all to the folks who submitted these really thoughtful prompts and fodder for our discussion. And let's jump in to part 2 of Ask a Development Director. What do development directors look for in an organization they want to work with?
Well, I'm actually going through finishing up an interim assignment at the moment, and we're hiring for this role, the director of advancement. And I was thinking about this the other day on my walk, where I was like, what would compel somebody? Obviously, there's just there's very basic things, right? Do you have benefits? Do you have 401k match? What's the salary? I think a lot of it is connection to the cause. So development directors, I always encourage people you work in your sector, it best. If you're passionate about arts and culture, stay in arts and culture. If you're passionate about education, have some hook in, because it's important that you have a connection to the cause, because you will be out there talking about it. And so you want to not convince yourself, but convince others about the cause. So I mentor a lot of fundraisers, and they go, well, I could, I'm into education, but there's, the hospital is hiring a gift officer and it's a really good salary. And I go yeah. And, understand that it's a new language, right? It's a whole language of programs and services. I took a detour in my career and worked for a houselessness organization that provided shelter support and services to families and children. But I was passionate about that because of education. So I had a hook in of, and truly it aligned with my values, which is, I think, the bigger part of what a development director should be looking at is, does this organization align with your values? So in terms of the hook and interest, that's passion, and passion can't be everything. You have to have an organization that aligns with your values in the mission, but also in the leadership and the board. Not everything's going to be perfect, but you do really have to have that intuitive feeling about going this is an organization where I can grow and where I can help it grow. So, obviously collaboration, but also support from the executive director, support from the board is extremely important, as well as, making sure that in your interviews, because if you are going for a director of development role, you will be asked a lot of tough questions. You can also ask a lot of tough questions. Are you walking into, do you want me to raise a lot of money very quickly, or do you want me to grow a department and an organization strategically? And it's not that it's one or the other. Not everyone is a unicorn. And I think a lot of these jobs expect unicorns.
Yeah.
They expect you to not only raise a big portion of the contributed revenue budget line yourself and be the frontline gift officer with a portfolio, you also have to manage the team. You also have to build a strategic plan. And quite frankly, it's very unrealistic. So I think you have to really get in those rooms when you're interviewing and say, what are the actual priorities and what's the financial reality of this organization and situation? So those are things that I like to coach. I mean, my students, obviously, but also professionals who I work with, where it's does it align with your values? Can you talk about the cause? And what is the reality that you're walking into? And are you prepared for it?
Yeah.
Because if you are ready to come in and say, I am going to gloves off and raise a bunch of money, great. good, but just, you have to be ready for what you're walking into.
Yeah, absolutely. And to dig in a little bit more to the nitty gritty,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
if you're coming in, especially at a higher level, development director, director of advancement, if you have kind of a responsibility to understand, like you said, the financial reality of the organization. Obviously, you want to review the organization's needs, over the past several years. If you're in the middle of some kind of campaign, having an update sort of on like where you're at on that campaign. Are there a bunch of gift commitments that need to be collected? How are on track are you,
Yeah.
right? And like
It's great.
where did the person that was in that position before like leave the status of those relationships, and then just the fiscal solvency and like the status of like reserves. I mean, like you said, are we in a situation where like if we don't raise $10 million, in the next year, like we're gonna have to close down, like, or so just and if any organization is coy with providing that information, like that's kind of a bad sign, right?
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. Yeah, and I think that's, well, you also hit on something that, I mean, I know this podcast is very evergreen, but I mean, we're in a moment right now where there is, in 2025, where there is a need for development directors to close some budget gaps left over from the pandemic. And I think there is, I don't want to say there's dishonesty in the sector right now, but I think there is not as much transparency for these roles as I think there should be, especially because, but I don't blame the leaders. I actually point to the system itself. I actually blame the structure, the business model of nonprofits, where, we weren't meant to really, I'm sorry, this controversial take, like we weren't meant to really survive major global events like a pandemic. We really weren't. And I don't think we were set up for sustainability through those things, because we didn't think it would ever happen or it would ever affect us. And so I think a lot of organizations now are facing the reality that, yes, we do not have a lot of cash, and donations are extremely volatile because of economic and, as we're seeing now, like political influences. The price of eggs does affect people's charitable giving, because that's disposable income, right? And so I think there's a lot of realities we're facing. So I think the more candid and transparent a candidate can go into the interview process, that also will help them just with planning and sort of ground them in a reality where it's like, okay, well, maybe I can't do this this big aspirational, I'm going to just raise money for a great theater or a great education institution. Maybe I do need to do damage control for the first 3 years of my job. And honestly, to prevent burnout and such, it's good to just know that stuff before you accept the offer. Because if you're like, my first 2 years are just going to be cleaning things up and then planning for a campaign in 5 years, great. You have a plan now.
right.
There's your work plan. And that's a better place to go into than finding all that out within your first 6 months and then you're stuck.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And we've heard too many cases like that, right? Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of job postings and not a lot,
Lots.
not a lot of qualified candidates, because people, either boards or executives or whomever, or the candidates themselves, like there was just information withheld at some point in the process that was then discovered later,
Yeah.
and either someone left or the expectations were too high. I think that's also an epidemic that's hitting our sector, is expectations are way too high for these roles. And there's not a lot of, support, I think, from leadership because of a lack of understanding of how fundraising works.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point around the job descriptions, right, for these development, these
Yeah.
fundraising jobs, it's like so unrealistic. And sometimes when I'm reading them
Six
and I'm like, are
pages.
you kidding me? Like, what are you?
6 pages, and then it's like starting salary is $70,000,
Yeah.
and
And
you're
you're
like,
like,
I don't get it.
come on. Like, I mean, those are indicative in and of themselves of like, okay, do you go in and educate? This is what I can offer you, but like this,
Yeah.
all of this is not realistic for one person to do. And that's probably not all that you shouldn't need to be focusing on all these things at this moment, right?
Yeah. And that's okay to say that, by the way.
Exactly.
Like, that is
Yeah.
okay to say, like, you're asking for a gift officer and it's unrealistic. Like, what is the priority? And that's sort of the question you can pose is like, okay, I see this 6-page job description. What is the most immediate priority? And then long term, what is it? Because if you're a director of development, you are a manager, you are a strategic leader and a team manager. There should be no pressure put on you to also be a principal gift officer. You should be able to do it, but there shouldn't be like you get 100 principal gifts and you have to manage a team of 20. You just can't do that. And create an operational plan and a strategic plan. You just can't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one thing I do see in these, and this is an anonymous question submitted. One thing I do see in these job descriptions is bringing donor relationships with you. Is it fair for organizations to expect incoming development directors to bring donor relationships with them, which I'm assuming means, they need to materialize?
Not at all. No, no, no. It's in fact, it's very rude to assume that. And I've really ticked off some executive directors since I've started my consulting practice because I have been asked point blank, like, we will hire you because of the people you know. And I go, like, that's not fair. And that's also incredibly rude and a violation of my relationship with that person, with that donor, because it is, I am very close with very philanthropic people, but I don't ask them for things that they themselves are not giving to. Like, that is a personal relationship that I built from a professional setting. And, I have been lucky where, those folks have asked me, who I'm working with and, if it aligns with them, great. But no, I will say that's incredibly rude to say, we are going to hire you because we think that you have a little black book of contacts who you can bring. And I think that's also, well, it is just like on a human level, it's very rude because it is sort of like you're using me to get to wealth. And you're also presuming that that person will give because I am associated. And that's not the case. That's very lazy. I think it's also very troublesome because you're not actually stewarding that relationship, and so it becomes very it's purely transactional at that point, and a violation of privacy for the director of development. I've had to, really put some executive directors in place where I'm just like, that is not okay to say at all, because that's, like, oh, I will only hire you for my personal gain. That's what they're
Yeah.
saying. Like,
Yeah.
point blank, I will only hire you so that you can give me what I want,
Yeah.
and not, hey, I'm going to hire you because I see that you know these people, so you must have some way of building relationships that could be valuable to my organization. That really is what EDs and boards need to see is wow, this person knows all these people. They must have some strategy, or they themselves might be a good relationship builder. But no, you should never do that. I don't think. And big red flag if your potential or current employer says that to you.
Thank you so much for providing clarity on that question. I think that's
Yeah.
something that so many people in the sector need to hear and understand. And I
Yeah.
think it also just, it's telling because I think there's just a lot of general, basic, non fundraising education orientation
Yeah.
that people need, because they don't understand like the development process and world and the ethics and the values that live within that. And so, you hear people say, "Oh, like so you guys got a gift from Mackenzie Scott. Can you get Mackenzie Scott to give us some money?" Oh, man, come
Yeah,
on.
and the fact is like, it's like she will give if this is aligned to her, right? Like, and that mindset too, or in that example you gave, is from a very transactional point of view. All I need is 5 minutes in front of Mackenzie Scott, and then I can da 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 da,
Yeah.
and then she's going to give me money. And the fact is like, that is a very transactional way of thinking. If you really want to build personal relationships, and by God, community centric relationships, because that phrase community centric fundraising is thrown around
Yeah.
so much now, you can't be doing that. You can't be, and also you can't be focused on one person, because you do not know. And this is something that Hannah and I talk about in the sustainable fundraising book, you do not know who in your current donor base could be a secret Mackenzie Scott. And
Mm,
all they need is extra education or that consistent stewardship, feeling belonged, to give that $1 million gift, to leave their entire estate in your bequest. You're focusing on people, especially with development directors, like if you're hiring somebody for their contacts, quote unquote, you're completely ignoring your current donor base. And you're completely
mm-hmm.
ignoring taking care of the people who are already supporting you and who might have the ability that you don't know, because wealth is not seen, it's shown. You don't know who has that ability to give you a Mackenzie Scott gift,
Yeah.
right? And then what are you going to do? Well, and then just to sort of go with your example further, once you get in front of Mackenzie Scott and she gives you the gift, what are you going to do after that?
Mm-hmm.
Are you like, what are you going to do after that? What, keep asking her every single year? Great.
Right.
Well, she, like everybody else, may decide she doesn't want to give.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And so you're kind of SOL with the rest of your donor community because you're ignoring them to focus on this one person. And what does that look like too, values wise? You're putting one person on a pedestal above your community of donors. So there's a lot there. There's a lot, you're right, ethically that is wrong with it. And also, you have to walk the walk if you want to lead as a community organization with values and a vision and
Yeah.
mission. Focus on the people who are already giving to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Since we're talking about the likes of Mackenzie Scott, I have a question. I think a lot of
Love
people,
her. Love
yeah, a
her.
lot of people are
Yes. Yeah.
curious about is
Yeah.
these. It's my understanding that there's lists that you can buy of wealthy donors. What is the value of those lists? Or is it worth the money for, how do people know if it's worth investing in that? And if you're ready to take that approach, or is it something that, is really only for a small niche of nonprofit organizations?
Yeah. So I think what's interesting is, well, part of my next chapter in my career is I'm studying to get my CAP certification, Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy, and would love to work, sort of on the side of advising folks on how to give away their money because, well, I've always just loved that, and I love working with folks who want to give their money away and having those conversations about impact and saying like, oh, you should check out this organization or that. But I think, is there value in stuff like that? I think what we're going to see in the next few years is, the greatest wealth transfer we've ever seen in history. I mean, that's like documented. That's out there. New York Times did a big editorial on it. So it's difficult when you take the approach of buying a list and then putting something out there and hoping that somebody writes $1 million check. They might be capable of it, but as we know from like donor cycle and prospecting, capacity is only 1/3 of what a prospect is. It's capacity, affinity, and propensity. So yes, they might be givers, propensity. They might have the capacity, but do they have the affinity for you to do that? And I think like if you have it, maybe not solicitations should be sent, but cultivation, invitations to things, right? Or those are the lists that you give to your board or that you give to your development committee to say, what are the connections here? But I don't think there needs to be, a lot of brain space or time spent on those because it's a lot similar to buying a list from the local business journal for corporate sponsorships. It's great. You can email them. But ultimately, who is going to get you in the door with those corporations are the employees or somebody who is associated with that, who has experienced what you've done. As I mentioned, cultivating a new donor, including corporate, takes like 12 to 18 months. So if you want to go all in on that, great. But if you just want to, maybe reach out to them, invite them to something and just keep inviting them or ask if they can be added to the marketing list, great. Because it might strike them at a certain time. I have a little bit of, it rubs me the wrong way, like, the list thing, because again, those are wealthy, affluent people who have shown their wealth through philanthropic or charitable giving or purchasing real estate. So that wealth is shown, but a lot of wealth is very quiet and hidden. So again, you don't know who, you don't know donor community, for instance, maybe is sitting on a bunch of Apple stock from the right?
Right.
You just don't know.
Right.
And you will never know because wealth and money is personal to the people. You don't go out and ask how much money do you have in your bank account. So yeah, I would say take it with a grain of salt, and try not to get emotionally attached to those
Hmm.
lists because
Right.
they also serve a purpose. They are generated by data that is, public and property records, political donations, things like that. So it's an aggregate of sorts, and you want to take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I don't have any direct experience with these lists, right? The
Hmm.
organizations I work with are mostly very small, barely have any development staff,
Yeah.
and definitely don't have money to buy those lists. But this point around the greatest wealth transfer in American history is so important, and I think sometimes we get hyper fixated on like the billionaires, right?
Yes.
And we look at the billionaire class now and are extremely discouraged, at least those of us in the social justice space, because we see how they're really investing in the opposite of what we're trying to achieve in the social justice equity space, with the Mackenzie Scott and a handful of others being the exceptions.
Hmm.
But like you said, there's a lot of quiet money out there.
Lot.
So how do you know how much someone can potentially give?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, there are prospecting tools out there. There's iWave I've used many times. There's a lot of great prospecting tools out there that does aggregate public data. Although I will say like that is good to have that as a tool, but much like ChatGPT, it shouldn't be the sole reliable resource for you to analyze or make decisions because a lot of that data is contingent on property value.
Hmm.
So someone can look very wealthy because they bought their house in Santa Monica in 1963, and Jesus, over time, right? Like that is now a $4 million house. So this person who might, be just a regular Joe working class family might look like they have the ability to give millions of dollars based on the data that is accessed by this database. I do say one thing to look at though is your donor data. And so like obviously looking at year over year, have people increased their giving? Have people given more when asked or prompted by a specific thing, right? We need $1,000. We need 100 people at $1,000 to raise our goal, and then a $50 donor gives 1,000. Like you want to notice patterns and sort of very macro patterns of donor behavior. But the other thing is that I've told organizations is like you do actually need to beta test your donor base. You need to A/B test. You need to have a message that might be a little more reliant, right? Give today, support us for $25. And then maybe a more riskier one, right? Like we're looking for 100 people to give $1,000. Will you join us? And then segment out your donor base. Maybe the first time givers and lapsed donors get the, renew at $25. But then your tried and trues get the $1,000 one. And you kind of test, like you can do your own prospecting through these sort of beta tests within your communications. Now, the biggest fear though of that EDs have told me is like, well, what if I lose donors? Or what if a donor unsubscribes, right? And it's like, well, you have to take some risk, right? It's one or the, and if a donor unsubscribes from your emails, doesn't mean they're going to stop donating. They still have a donor renewal date, but you do want to kind of take a little bit of risk when it comes to messaging. That's important for segmenting your donor base. Again, like who is in your base in terms of like the groups, whether that's the levels that they give at, or whether you want to do, Hannah and I in our book, we talk about you should have a major donor threshold, and it should literally, your segment should start major donors and then everybody else.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if you want to really create equity with your donor base, it should be, major donors and everyone else. And then from there, you just get to see, how people respond and whether they upgrade, whether they're renewing. But you really want to kind of understand what your donor based behavior is. Yeah.
No, that's super helpful. And you can also look at your peer, like to see if they've given to your peers, right? So they given to the
Totally.
ballet, have they given to the symphony, have they given to the museum, and
Absolutely.
how much did they, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, when I was at the Pacific Northwest Ballet, I mean, Seattle is a very unique city. Obviously, there's a lot of wealth here, but in terms of, and it's a very philanthropic city. A lot of people poo-poo it as non, but it's a very, very philanthropic city. But there are people who do support multiple organizations at once because they can. And that was very different for me coming from the South, where there is a lot of generational money. And with generational wealth also comes generational ideals and generational sort of commitments. And so people who did give to the symphony did not give to the art museum, and vice versa. So it was very hard to, quote unquote, convert a donor who was, it's like, well, you like the arts. And it's like, no, I like the North Carolina Symphony. I don't like, the Museum of Art. So there are giving cultures in certain areas as well, and certain regions too. The tri-state area of New York City gives in a very different way than Southern California donors. And you can read all about that in like Giving USA and the Lilly School. But I think like notice those nuances too, like who gives where, and maybe don't obsess over it, but like definitely notice where money is given.
Thank you. And another question that came up was around like what's changed over the course of the last 10 years, and also how has technology affected fundraising? I really want to lean into
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
framing of the question around technology, especially now, because with the likes of, ChatGPT and Gemini and others, right? Folks are, it's taking folks a lot less time to do their grant proposals, for example, or
Hmm.
their
Yeah.
solicitation letters, and
Yeah.
even the automation tools that are out there that help you, respond to donors in a very timely way and make sure you're notifying them. But yeah, what have you seen change the most as a result of the technological tools that have been emerged over the last decade or so?
I love that question because I just was on a call with Louis Dietz, who's doing kind of piloting a fundraising AI software called Wise. I mean, it's pretty revolutionary, incredible. And it's just one of many instrumental. The grant prospecting tool has an amazing AI integration that doesn't help you write your proposal, but you can upload past proposals and it will summarize the different sections of it, of a grant proposal, so you can just pull it in and then it's already auto populated by like the best of your language of your summary, and then you can edit it towards whatever the proposal is. It won't, like I said, it won't write the proposal for you, but it'll have the sections. I think that's incredible. I mean, yeah, Instrumental's doing amazing work with that. I'm very happy and very, very, as somebody who has been an executive director of one and worked in fundraising shops where there's nothing, I am so happy that now AI can just give you a fundraising plan and give you annual fund templates, and I don't have to spend, sleepless hours trying to build all of those.
Yeah.
I do think it's really going to be helpful for templates and
Hmm.
starting places. I do think that, of course, everything needs to be double checked with a set of human eyes, especially things like acknowledgement letters. I think that's the thing I'm weariest about is like
Hmm.
tax receipts need to be double checked and triple checked for data. But I do think the automation of email invites and annual fund letters and such, mail merges, like I think that's really, really exciting. I also think AI is going to be really helpful in going back to my previous answer in analyzing donor behavior and in analyzing like these are the donors who have been giving year over year, because there hasn't been a consistent software or tool that can do that. Blackbaud Razor's Edge can, but you still have to build a dashboard in order to get an analytics report. And so there's a lot of steps for each individual unique software. Tessitura, Salesforce, Blackbaud Razor's Edge, Bloomerang, all those. They're all different. And I think AI will really help with like, I'm going to upload the past 5 years of donor data and give me a summary of analytics of this. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm really excited too about how it's going to be used for efficacy for teams, like how it's going to really streamline, major gift proposals and organizing it so that gift officers can, go out and have donors. One of the, it's a joke, but I do tell all my students, I said fundraising looks like it's galas and wine and dinner, and then you get in and you're like, wow, this is a lot of paperwork. And because you're like, I have to do the mail merge and I have to input the gifts and I have to track performance and do all of that. And it is a job, right? I mean, every bit of it should feel like a job in some way, but I think a lot of that job, though, and the lack of infrastructure and processes can be helped with AI so that people can go back to sort of really thinking about strategy more.
Yeah.
And relationship building. Yeah.
Yeah, getting out in the community, exactly, and building your contact list and just having more conversations,
Totally.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I agree. I would also love to hear, maybe this is a little side project for you if you're not already doing it. I would love to hear from the foundation side on like how, since the release of ChatGPT and these other tools, how that has impacted their grant making, their grant review process. Just over the last couple of years, like the number of funders, foundations that are coming back and saying like, we got 800 proposals. You know what I mean? When like we usually get like 150. It's so competitive now with these grants. I'm convinced that a part of that is the technology, right? That's helping people get these things submitted in a more timely fashion. But also, I don't know. I mean, I myself have read, more kind of ChatGPT generated grant proposal answers than I'd like. You know what I mean? I'm just like, come on, man. This is
the worst.
Like, I'm like, I can tell this is
absolutely
not
terrible.
You, right? And so, yeah, I am curious of like how that is shifting grant making. My initial sense is that more funders are and will continue to be moving to invitation only.
Yes.
Grants opportunities.
I agree. What I would like to see, what I would like to see foundations do is actually allow for more community panels for their review processes and allow AI and ChatGPT to work on that process rather than the process of evaluating the proposals that come in, because one of the biggest barriers of grant proposals is a lack of knowledge of how to write a grant proposal. And so with AI and ChatGPT and all these sort of tools that will go in and evaluate it, nonprofit, want to try to phrase this the best. I'll use an example. I've served on several grant panels for National Endowment for the Arts, and there have been grant proposals that are very clearly written, first-time grant proposals by organizations, and so they either over-explain it or under-explain, not really answering the question. And some panelists will notice that and say, well, this is a deterrent, blah, blah, blah. But then we have to explain, well, maybe this is the first thing. We can't assume, of course, but like we have to give grace for that. Not everything is perfect and not everybody has the professional grant writing language. And so I worry that in evaluating grant proposals through AI, that AI, which does have sort of a level of standard, will dismiss, organizations that do need the funding, but perhaps they are not, it's not being written by a professional, right? It's being written by a volunteer who serves on the board of this small organization that deserves the funding. Right. So I hope that grant makers actually use it, and this corporations too, use it to create like processes for community panels who can evaluate these on a very human level, right? Where it's like, well, it's not the best written grant, but we're not basing it off of the quality of the writing. We're basing it off the quality of the project, which is ultimately how those conversations in the NEA panels ended up, where it was like, well, regardless of how it's written, does the project make sense? Is there community impact, artistic quality? And I don't think a robot or software can really determine that. And I think it's very unfair if we assign AI to evaluate it based on the quality of the writing.
Yeah. That's great. That's deep. I hadn't even thought about the other side of it. Like foundations using AI to review the proposals. Like, whoa, like, but of course they are. Like some are at
Well,
least.
and there's the bigger conversation about, just foundations already sort of being a little gatekeepy with their
Of
process, and
course.
so therefore shutting out BIPOC, LGBTQ, female-led, minority-led organizations because the organization doesn't feel that they have access. So imagine if it's like, well, we don't feel like we have access. Oh, and our proposal, the first proposal that we're writing, maybe, right, is going to be evaluated by ChatGPT. There's like a real sense of like real, inequity there.
Yes.
And so am I calling AI kind of propelling some very problematic ideas? Well, yes, if you're
Yes.
using it to evaluate language, right? And quality of language. It's that perfectionism sort of monitor, right? And that's very unfair. But I do think a foundation could say, how can we create community panels for our cause, and sort of create a panel process, create an inclusive panel process, and then split up your 800 proposals into, like maybe like 50 community proposals or panels, and then they evaluate it. It's going to be a lot more work on the foundation's part, but you're going to be more inclusive and you're going to
Yeah.
be better. Yeah.
Oof. Yeah. No, that's deep, man. That's a whole nother episode. Like this is, yeah, no,
Happy to
it's
come back. Happy to come back about that. Yes.
wow. Well, let me just ask a few things about how folks can, access your expertise and what you have to
Oh, sure.
offer. Can people you teach at Seattle Pacific University?
Or Seattle University, the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, UNCG.
And people can take those classes on their own, or they kind of have to be admitted into the program.
It's admitted, it's undergraduate and graduate, but I do have my own consulting practice, Artful Living, and my website, jcooperarts.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn, Instagram. Always happy to connect. But
Yeah, absolutely. And can you just what kind of services are you offering under your consulting practice?
a lot of my focus is individual giving strategy, and also board fundraising is really my niche. So how to get your boards to fundraise, or at least like fundraising training sessions and such. I really like to work with organizations that are needing also coaching for their development directors or executive directors, on and staff as well, teams, on not just how to fundraise, but how to think about fundraising. The phrase culture of philanthropy gets thrown around a lot, and so I like to come in and be like, how do we define that? How do we define our values? How do we define how fundraising works in our organization? So a lot of it is coaching. A lot of it is, I definitely do create strategy and plans and can do that. But I really like to be a partner with an organization, because I personally don't have one set way of doing fundraising, and like to just work with the organization to be very reflective about, like, where do we want to go? Where are we at? What are the processes that need to be built? And here are best practices. And I think that's where my research and writing has come in handy a lot. And also being a frontline fundraiser, I've seen what can work and also what is evolving and changing. So I don't come in and say, this is how I've done it. It's just like, well, an organization like yours is doing it similar to this. Let's see how it fits within your organization. So really tailoring it. But I definitely have a lot of focus on individual giving strategies and boards. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh,
It's
thank
been a
you.
pleasure to have this
Oh,
discussion with
so
you.
fun.
And I also want to thank all the wonderful people that submitted really thoughtful questions. So applause for them. Yeah, give them us love.
Yeah.
Appreciate the fan base, that we have that's
Yeah.
submitting questions, and we'd like to
Totally.
do more of that. But thanks again for everything, and
Thanks, Jordan.
have a great weekend. This has been so fun.
You too.
All right.
Great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to How to Build a Nonprofit. If you liked the episode, check out the show notes for a link to donate to our guest organization, and give us a rave review while you're at it. Feel free to leave comments and questions on your app about what intrigued you most. If you have any suggestions for future guests, email us at howtobuildanonprofit@gmail.com.